you so much. If I can have your attention, please. First and foremost, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here today. We have someone of high dignitary status, someone who's carrying a torch that we could never carry, and he wanted to grace his presence with us and start off his guest speaking tour at a local staple. And I thought nothing other but cut and run.
Yeah. Thank you.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Give him a hand clap. Give him a hand clap.
Hi.
With all the history that cut and run has, and Pete and I were talking about it the other day. We just don't come here for a haircut.
Yeah.
When we sit in these chairs, it's like a therapy session. Think about it. Each and every one of the hairstylists here, you just don't have a skill in hairstyling. You listen to our problems, you know, without subjection. You give us advice. We just don't come here leaving good, we come here feeling good.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's something about the barbershop that has some sort of staple in the black community. And outside of Valentine's Day and Black History Month, what a great way to start off Madiba Mandela's guest speaking tour.
Yes.
Yes. Let's rock and roll. Look, it's a pleasure to have you. Pleasure now. Pete,
Thanks for putting this together.
come on, brother. Love you guys, man. Love you guys.
Thank you, Darius.
Thank you.
We don't get to hear that enough.
All right. You already know, brother. You already know.
Just wanted to again reiterate what Darian said, but welcome Madiba here with us in our community, in our local community, and this is his Building Bridges tour. So we first and foremost, the barbershop. The barbershop is one of many stories. People share their stories and community. So this is a diverse barbershop, Michelle and Pete, and you know, it's just in this community in the Upper Beaches. It's like we said, a staple in our community too. So wanted to welcome you, but instead of me saying who you are, I love the way you introduce yourself to people that don't know you. So can you introduce yourself to us?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you to everyone for this wonderful opportunity. I've not had a chance to be at the barber shop in probably almost 10 years now. My name is Siyabulela Mandela. Professionally, they say Dr. Mandela. I am a descendant of King Ubenguka. I hail from the house of Mandela. The kingdom that I come from is called the Tembu Kingdom. It is configured of 5 houses, and I come from the last house of that kingdom, and that is the house of Mandela. Geographically, we are located in the eastern part of South Africa, which is in the south of the African continent. I'm from a province called the Eastern Cape, and of course today I'm not standing. Whilst I'm seated, but I stand in the shoulders of my ancestors, Madiba, Sopicho, Imyem, Molomsila, Zondas Jaba, Nobazmamzona, and Negesmenzeng. For me, I think, particularly during Black History Month, it is of critical importance to know who you are and where you come from. So when I mention the names of the ancestors that came before me, it is part of also locating myself in my own history, in my own genealogy, which is the wisdom that has been passed from one generation to the next. When you are a young man in any of the African country, in the African continent, particularly in Southern Africa, one of the first lessons that your father teaches you is to know your clan names. Your clan names are the names of those who came before you. So he will always ask you, what is your name? And when you tell your name, you should mention your ancestors. Those are the clan names. And one of the reasons why it was important for them to instill that discipline and to instill that history to us is so that when we go out to engage with the world, when the world throws at us stones and everything else that they throw at us, you always remember who you are and where you come from. And when you know who you are and where you come from, the likelihood of you knowing where you are going is very high. And the likelihood of you to be able to respond when those in the world try to pull you down, it's very high. So this is where you draw the source of your strength from. You can imagine the likes of Madiba when they sent him to prison. The expectation was that they would be able to break him down, break his spirit. They could not break his spirit because he knew who he was. On the day Madiba was sentenced to 27 years in prison, he showed up there dressed in his traditional attire. And one of the reasons why he opted to dress in that particular way, he knew that there was only two possibilities and resolution to his case. It's either a death sentence or life in prison. But he wanted to go into that battlefield embraced in the wisdom of who he is and where he comes from. So you'll pardon me if I gave you such a long introduction.
Yes, I love the way you introduced yourself, and that is what we want to share with the youth of today. So when we go to the schools, this is something that I really feel is important for every youth, not just youth from the continent of Africa, but all of the youth need to know who they are and where they come from. So when we go to those schools, what are some of the things that you want to share with youth?
I think for me, without knowing who you are and where you come from, it's difficult for this generation to know what is the path forward. It is only when you understand who you are, where you come from, and what your people have been through, that you get to have a clear understanding and a full view of what is the mandate, the sole mandate of the existence of an individual. We don't exist just to live. We exist to continue the fight started not by ourselves, by those who came before us. I was listening to one day an interview that Madiba had, and now they were asking Madiba about his casual engagements with the Queen of England, who was, for some reason, who ended up being Madiba's friend, from being probably one of his enemies at the time when we were fighting against apartheid. So they were saying, why you don't approach the Queen with the decorum that she deserves? Madiba says, well, I also come from a kingdom, and I also have my own king, and in fact I am of royal blood myself. So why should I be expected to engage with the Queen in a way that is completely different to how the Queen engages with me? And there it was a declaration of the understanding of his position in the greater scheme of what his history is. Understanding that as much as there are royal families, the ones that we know most from the UK and many other countries, I think even here in Canada you pledge your allegiance to the Queen, the King now. We also come from a royalty. When you understand that, then you are able to position yourself in a way that commands respect to the people that you engage with. Because the reality is, sis, when the young men go out in the street, they will always be told that they are inferior. They will always be told that they don't have any history. They will always be told that theirs is to serve, not to lead. But when they understand who they are and where they come from, they understand that they are there to serve as much as they are there to lead. So therefore, no one should tell them that they are inferior and they are superior over them. So that is the most important thing for me. When it's what the likes of, for those who have read history and philosophy, Frantz Fanon, Steve Biko talk about the decolonization of the mind. You know, this for me is more important. When you do that, when you instill that culture and that history, you enable a process of decolonization of the mind. That is where true freedom and liberation for me comes from. You know, for today we live in an age where our forefathers and foremothers fought relentlessly against different forms of injustice, and yet our people are not free. And you ask why our people are not free. Decolonization has to be physical and also mental. Slavery is something that is both physical and also mental. You know, there are people who are still locked up in chains mentally because the minds are not yet decolonized. I'll give you an example. Growing up, my grandmother, because of the material condition of their time, they grew up during an apartheid era. So they are subjected to the conditions where if you're a man, you either become a bus driver or a garden boy. If you're a woman, you are subjected to work in the kitchen. And that's the only role that you play. So my grandmother was working at the white man's kitchen. And growing up, I came to realize that some of the things that they say were very problematic. For instance, grandma would associate excellence with whiteness. There were terms like, if you excel at whatever you do, they would say, now ungumlungu, meaning that you are a white man now. You know, because excellence and success is only something that is reserved for that particular race. And although growing up we were free, thanks to Mandela and his generation, but there was still that psychological perception and slavery that they still endured because they went through years and decades upon decades of marginalization and oppression. So they were not entirely free in the mind. So when I engage with the works of Frantz Fanon, the works of Steve Biko, Frantz Fanon has one of the most important two books, The Wretched of the Earth, and the other one, Black Skins, White Mask. I think some young men need to engage with that work. And the likes of Baldwin, there they speak about the decolonization of the mind. And I think those are some of the lessons that we need to inculcate into the younger generation. You know, those are the wisdom we need to impact into the next generation. When you decolonize the mind, and this is more important across color lines. When you decolonize the mind, young men, both black and white, come to have an understanding of exactly what is their role. Because the reality is, if you ask us, this younger generation, we have no vested interest in interpreting the old notions of racism, superiority of one race over the other. We really have no interest in dealing with that. But because the systems under which we're born subscribes into those notions, we are subjected into those conditions, which is something we didn't ask for. It's something that has been subjected to us. So if we then take through the younger generation, impart this knowledge and wisdom, decolonizing the mind, they come to understand that we can create a much better world for ourselves, for these generations and generations yet to come. So I think for me, those are the few things that I think are more important for the younger generation. Those are the things that, to be honest, have helped me as a young person. I was a visiting scholar and professor at St. Paul and the College of St. Benedict in Minnesota, all white university, all white. I was the third black scholar and professor that they ever had in their history. When I got there, I was challenged. I was questioned on my intellectual capabilities. They went as far as searching to the universities whether I had a PhD and all those kind of things. You know, and they would really do that when they want to discredit you. They went as far as to do that not because there was something wrong with my intellectual capabilities. It was simply because they were not used to being challenged in the manner in which we were challenging them in class, in a classroom setting and off the classroom setting. They were not being able, they were not used when someone is openly confronting white supremacy. You know. But when you then know who you are and where you come from, you are able to stand firm. You don't break at the heat of the moment. You know. In fact, you come to realize that this is the struggle of ages. There are many who have came before me who have went through this very same scrutiny, criticism. But you come to also realize that if you are confronted with such criticism, it actually means that there is something that you're actually doing right. You know? And that requires you to then understand when our forefathers and foremothers, that when they said "aluta continua," what exactly did they mean? The struggle must continue. What is it exactly that they mean by that? So for me, if you equip the young men and the young women, this generation, I think we can change the world and we can make it a better place.
Okay, I know we're short on time, but I wanted to, so Black History Month is February for us.
Yeah.
South Africa in February is a very big day too.
Yes.
Do you want to share February 11?
Well, in South Africa, February is a very big month. In fact, today, what's the date today?
Today's the 14th.
Today is the 14th. Oh, it's Valentine's. Yeah. Today is the 14th. Somebody's going to be in trouble. I need to buy some flowers. In South Africa, we just celebrated 36 years since the dawn of democratic dispensation. It represents this week, 11 February 1990 was the day when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. So February 11 is one of the most important days in our history. Our heroes and heroines were given an opportunity to bask in the beauty of the sunshine in the African continent, having been subjected into harsh and difficult conditions in prison. Madiba for 27 years, many others for 20, others 15, others 10. For the first time, they saw the day of light. For the first time, they engaged in this month. They began a journey to define what kind of a life we want for our country. Having subjected for almost 100 years in the conditions of violence, dehumanization, racism, apartheid, injustice, deprived of our own right to exist as people, subjected into laws of various kinds, defined on the basis of segregation. So it represents a month in which we defeated injustice, and we had an opportunity to define and begin a journey where we define the kind of a life that we want as a nation. It is the month where democracy was born, where apartheid was defeated, where injustice was buried. It is a month where our heroes and heroines began sitting in the table. with those who define themselves as the enemy, to define what kind of a future they want for this generation and generations yet to come. For me, it represents a period in history where I was given an opportunity to survive, to live, and to see the day of light. To be able to bask under the sun, enjoying the limited freedoms that I am enjoying today. I was born in 1992, 2 years after Madiba was released. And that day, 11 February 1990, represents an opportunity where I was given a chance to live. And I say this because in my work, I've been fortunate to work in conflict zones around the world, from Sudan to Iraq. I finished a year in Iraq recently, well, last year. And when I see children dying, you know, men and women, limbs mutilated, I look back on 11 February 1990 when Madiba was freed and his generation engaged in a negotiation process and averting a civil war which would have made it impossible for me to be able to live had they went to war when he was released. Had they not negotiated for peace, I wouldn't have lived. I would have died at birth. And this would have been a reality for many who were born during that era as well. So when we celebrate 36 years since the dawn of democracy, democratic dispensation, we celebrate life. For we wouldn't have had an opportunity to live had they continued to wage an armed struggle. And in 93, the country almost broke into a civil war. It was for the first time in the history of South Africa that they had to call on Mandela to address the nation. At that point, he was not even yet a president. The country's president, FW de Klerk, could not address the masses, for the country was ready to go to war. And they needed a leader of a different breed. They needed a prisoner who has not yet been appointed a president to address the nation, to calm the spirit of the people, to say victory is in the horizons. Peace will prevail if the people can wait a little bit longer. And of course, it will take almost a year before Mandela will be elected to become a president. So 11 February for me, and the month of February in general, represent a day where, when I look back into it and look in retrospect to what is happening in the world today, countries engaged in a state of war, women and children dying, confronted with senseless violence, it just reminds me of what we could have been as a country had we not averted the civil war in 1993, had we not convinced the apartheid regime to release Mandela and his generation from prison so that they can negotiate a better future for their generation and generations yet to come. Look at what you have done for South Africa. For we owe our freedom to the international solidarity. Many of you who are senior in this room know of the days where you had to march against the apartheid system in South Africa, where you had to participate in protests in your university campuses, calling for Mandela to be freed from prison, calling for Mandela and his generation to be freed so that they can negotiate for freedom. You do not, what you always forget is the impact that you have created and your contribution into what South Africa is today, into what Mandela is today. You know. And we remain grateful, therefore, to you for your contribution, which has enabled us as this generation to be able to live to tell the story. Many are unable to live to tell the story. If you remember how many journalists that have been killed in the war between Israel and Palestine, many did not live to tell the story to the next generation. You look at Ukraine, many did not live to tell the story to the next generation. But you afforded us that opportunity. Maybe you don't understand how impactful that was for us. You gave us an opportunity to live. You really gave us an opportunity to live. So when you sit today and wonder, confronted by the geopolitics of today and the challenges that confront the world today, and you feel powerless, you feel hopeless, you must remember what you have done. The contribution that you have made to the freedom of others. And when you think that you are too small, to make a difference, now I'm going to give you, just before I stop talking, I talk a lot. I'm going to give you one of the most important African idioms. It goes like this: if you think you're too small to make a difference, spend the night with a mosquito. And you will know how much of a difference you can make, however small you think you are.
Thank you, Madiba, for sharing with us, and we appreciate you and the relationship and the bridge that you've built, that we're crossing over, coming to Canada and sharing with the youth and sharing with the community. It's so important, and we will keep it going. We'll keep this legacy going because we know how important it is, and we cherish and appreciate you and respect you. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got one, if you don't mind, sir. Can we talk about post-apartheid South Africa and like what's been implemented to kind of fix wealth gaps and what can be improved? Because I understand there's still some inequality when it comes to just the wealth gap between whites and blacks.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to post-apartheid South Africa, when Mandela became a president, he engaged in a process of restoring dignity back to our people. So he started a process of what called Rural Development Program, where he focused primarily on rebuilding South Africa post-apartheid and defining a new nation and how that nation should be understood both locally and internationally. So the likes of Desmond Tutu, for instance, who works alongside with Mandela, anchored the foreign policy of the country on the policy of Ubuntu, which means I am because you are, affirming our humanity by affirming the humanity of others. And the notion of a rainbow nation was born, where we all coexisted, black, white, colored, Indian, you name it. We defined a society that was, or we projected a society that was defined not on the basis of the color of your skin, creed, religion, or whatever markers of human difference, but a society where you are judged on the basis of the content of your character, what you are bringing into the table. So that's the society they wanted to create. And we've engaged for 30 years. I think last year we celebrated 30 years since the dawn of democracy, or 32 years since the dawn of democracy in South Africa. And the reality is we have provided the world a blueprint by which both white and black can coexist. And we've challenged the dominant narrative that we can only exist through segregation. We have proven to the world that we exist. And in fact, when you look into how South Africa is structured, from a soft power point of view, you look at sport, for instance. In North America here, you might not be familiar with rugby. Maybe you're familiar with football.
Not soccer.
You understand that South Africa is the only country in the world that has won the Rugby World Cup 4 times. And you ask yourself why and how. How does a nation that was born just yesterday is now one of the most leading countries insofar as sport is concerned? It's simply because of what Mandela and Desmond Tutu and many others of that generation, Winnie Mandela, have defined a nation, a new breed, a new species, where they focused more not on the differences, but on the opportunities that come when we come together. Then they use the slogans of "there's strength in our diversity." That's why internationally, sport-wise, it's difficult to defeat South Africa, because we pull in from different strengths. And our diversity becomes our strength. It becomes the foundation by which we build our nation. Of course, it is impossible, really, truly impossible, to assume that a nation that went through 100 years of oppression and marginalization would be able to completely erase the history of oppression, marginalization, and segregation. If it took us 100 years to be marginalized, you cannot expect that we can be able to completely overturn in just 30 years a history of 100 years. So this is where in the scales of analysis, people usually get it wrong. And they say, but you are considered one of the most unequal countries in the world. Of course, we should be considered as such, because we went through 100 years of segregation. So we are slowly and meticulously working through a process of defining a nation that is defined on the basis of diversity. That also means that we are working with bridging the inequality gap in our country, investing in education, inculcating the culture of diversity and the importance of diversity. And that for us is the foundation by which our nation is born. And of course, in contemporary times, you look at South Africa and say, but there's still segregation. Yes, there is still segregation. But as a nation, we are engaged in a process of rebuilding, renewal, and bridging those inequalities. Today they call me Dr. Mandela not because I'm that intellectually gifted. Yes, I am gifted. but because Mandela and his generation decided that they will invest in free education for the poor, so that the next generation can be able to engage into the renewal of the nation and be able to have the capabilities and the skills that are needed to rebuild the nation. I went to university for free. I don't owe anything, because the government paid for my education. You ask the young person here in North America, if they are educated, they are indebted to whoever gave them the money to go to education. So in other words, the vicious cycle of poverty continues, because they will not be fully free economically. Look at them, ask them in the US, they have to pay loans. They owe thousands and thousands of dollars to those who provided the education to them. And then you ask the South Africans, we don't owe a cent. You have your degrees, you are able to participate actively in the economic development of the country because the government invested into that. And of course we have challenges. We have our challenges. The inequality gap, which is a problem. We still have those who believe that white supremacy still exists and they are better than the others. The likes of Donald Trump was of the view that there is white genocide happening in South Africa.
I was going to ask you about that.
They had an intention to divide us. And where you see it clearly is when Donald Trump and his people asked for those who are marginalized to come. There were only 60 white people who went to the US. The rest said, we have no intention, no interest to come over. We are actually much better and more free where we are. They did not come. That should prove to you that, and the South Africa came together to argue our case, to say, please leave us alone. We are building our nation and we are actually much more happier. We have never been so happy as a nation. Leave us alone. So that should tell you that we are engaged in the process of building a nation defined by diversity, defined by the values of Ubuntu, the philosophy of Ubuntu, affirming our humanity by affirming the humanity of others, responding to the needs of the most vulnerable, free education for the poor, free housing for the poor, free healthcare for everyone in the country. The Cubans helped us by educating our generation, giving them the necessary skills to respond to the medical needs of our people. Now we have free healthcare in South Africa. Brother, you say you're coming to Cape Town, you will be confronted with the realities of racism. I am sorry to inform you. For there are still among us those who still believe into segregation, who still subscribes into racism. You'd remember, when Mandela was charged with the responsibility of ushering the nation towards the democratic dispensation, there were white people who left the country because they believed, and they still believe, that Mandela is a terrorist. There are those in the US who still believe the same. Here in Canada, there are still those who believe the same. And many left and they ran away. They went to Australia, they went back to the UK, others went to the US. 36 years later, the genocide that they assumed would happen did not happen. Some are coming back slowly because they are realizing that the US is not what they thought it was.
Yes.
And they are realizing that actually Australia is not what they thought it was. They are realizing that they are more free in South Africa than they are in Australia or in the UK. So they are slowly coming back. In fact, they even took government to court to say those who were born in South Africa should be allowed their citizenship back. And at that time, in 1996, Mandela and his generation said, those who are leaving, they are open to leave, but they must renounce their citizenship. For we are in the process of rebuilding a nation. If you want to leave, leave. But you cannot hang on and holding into the South African citizenship. If you leave us, you betray us, you think that will not succeed. And today, I think about last day, they won a case to say they must be allowed to come back. And we said, it's fine, we'll allow you back in the country. So South Africa is thriving, South Africa is doing well. Look at us. I mean, look at me. I'm the son of the soil, I am the byproduct of the negotiation process. I am free, I am liberated, I am educated, thanks to Mandela and his generation.
First of all, you're the spiritual incarnation of your grandfather. Like, the strength of your voice is incredible. I've never been so impressed with the history you bring just by your voice and your presence. So I'm blessed today. I come from the world of education. I'm a teacher by heart, by spirit. And the last time I saw someone in your family was when I went in 1998 with probably about 50, 60 students to what we now call Rogers Center. It was called Skydome. And there was a certain kind of inspiration the presence of your father brought to this country, to this city, to that venue, to those kids. A diverse group of kids that brought that energy back to the schools. And we were living in a very comfortable place of hope in that time. You're going to see a lot of students, a lot of children, a lot of youth. So I'm going to bring our conversation back to that sphere because this will help prepare you. What is it that you're going to say to today's youth when you go speaking at the colleges and the universities and the elementary schools you'll be speaking at on this tour? What are some of the things you might tell them?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for that question, brother. Appreciate it. Besides the fact that my brother P just gave me a new look and a new card, I've not even seen myself. I'm definitely going to boast about cut and run, and I'll mobilize some support towards this historic place for the youngsters to come into the professional as well. So thank you, Sapi. Thank you, brother. I think for me, one of the most important things, I'm a scholar, I'm a historian, I have an aspiration of becoming a lawyer, a diplomat. You never know, maybe a politician. I was born in a political family. Madiba is my great-grandfather, not my father. I say I'm a scholar of history, of philosophy, and of politics, simply because for me I think entrenching your mind in pursuit of knowledge is one of the greatest gifts that you can afford to yourself as a young person. This is where your true liberation comes from. When you speak about the decolonization of the mind, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to put in some work. You need to read. Forget about TikTok and Instagram and all those things. You need to, they say if you want to hide something from a Negro, put it in a book. And your key is the knowledge. The greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. That is the greatest weapon. So that is to say the key to liberation is your mind, your intellect. And now this is critical. This is important because when I talk about being a scholar of history and philosophy, Frantz Fanon argues somewhere, I think in the opening chapters of The Wretched of the Earth, Black Skins, White Marks as well, the same sentiments evaporate or vibrate. He argues that true freedom and liberation has to come through a process of engaging with the intellectual literature and understanding your role in history. So now Fanon argues that each generation has to define its purpose, fulfill it, or betray it with relative propensity. And this becomes critical because if you are a generation and you do not know what your purpose is as a generation, then you become lost. And this is clear because Fanon was born in an era where their mandate as a generation was clear because theirs was to respond to the material conditions of their time. And what were these material conditions? It was the realities of slavery and the realities of colonialization, the realities of segregation, apartheid, informed by the currency of racism and discrimination. So theirs was to wage a relentless struggle against those oppressive systems. And their mandate was clear. And theirs was to define a society for the next generation that was devoid of these oppressive systems. And their material relations and material conditions shouldn't be reflected into the next generation. So theirs was clean. So then the question comes to mind is, what begs the question then to this generation is exactly what is our mandate? In the light of our experiences, what then is our mandate as this generation? So these are some of the conversations that only us as this generation can be able to answer. What drives us? What keeps us up at night? are we able to define with clarity what our mandate is as a generation? Are we a lost generation? How do we respond to the material conditions of our times? And what are those conditions, if there are any? Are we concerned about those, or we just living to live? Or just living to breathe? So those are some of the questions. And then mine and the argument that I've been posing is that we have a collective responsibility to build upon the foundation laid by those who came before us. And we already know that foundation, the relentless struggle against slavery, colonialism, segregation, racism, apartheid, discrimination, and different forms of injustice. That is the foundation. And that foundation gave birth, and that relentless struggle gave birth into the dawn of democratic dispensation, the limited freedoms we enjoy today, human rights, the liberties, civil liberties that we enjoy today. So that came as a result of that relentless struggle that has now formed the foundation that we find ourselves in. So what is then our collective responsibility? It is to build upon that foundation. And the only way in which we build upon that foundation is by defining with clear clarity what then is our purpose and what then is our mandate as this generation. So those are the conversations that we would have with the youngsters and the younger generation.
I've heard you speak really beautifully and multiple times about the decolonization of the mind. And my mind has been marinated for the last 5 years in my course of study. And I have come to believe that not only people of color, but more so white people need to go through an intense decolonization of the mind. And I've heard you say that this tour is a Building Bridges tour, and I'm wondering how you would, like, that's been a huge part of the last 5 years, is digging into my ancestry, taking ownership for the pain that was caused in certain parts of my ancestry, and then the split nature of, we have very deep Celtic roots, and so there's a lot of harm that was caused to my people, a lot of disappearance of traditions and ceremony and what have you. And I find that a lot of youth to adults who have what they would call a European heritage, it's a blending together of very, very different cultures. They don't know whose shoulders they're standing on. And their parents don't know whose shoulders they've stood on. And in some cases, it's very, very hard to find out that information. And I've found that it's an embodied journey. And it's one that comes with a lot of grief. And it's one that gives you a lot of gifts, if you can go on that journey. And one of the people that I see that speaks really beautifully to it, I'm terrible with names. I've had many, many concussions, so I apologize, but the approach is called two-eyed seeing. And it was created here on the east coast of Canada, referring to the Indigenous people in this country and the harm that's been caused by the waves of colonization that have come here. I'm wondering, since you are speaking to such diverse groups of young people, how would you, or do you feel called to at all, encourage the young ones who have European heritage, which would probably be quite diverse if they dug into it, to dig into the problems that come from colonization within their own mind? And this is just my opinion, but I think there's a really, really deep-rooted sense of entitlement that comes from waves of colonization that people can't even touch because it feels so uncomfortable. And like, where would they start? And there is a huge grieving process that goes with that. And I've heard you speak of Ubuntu and that the strength and diversity
And I think that decolonization of the mind process needs to happen for everyone. And I'm curious to know, based on how strongly you are rooted in your own ancestry, how would you share that with young ones who have grown up without any touch points for their own ancestry, but who unconsciously benefit from white supremacy every day and the structures of it? Yeah.
I love your question. I also want to piggyback on that because a lot of
Please.
Black Canadians,
Yeah.
Caribbean kids, they also don't have that history and
Yeah,
that understanding
please.
of their history. So here you're probably going to be meeting a lot of kids that don't have that kind of, I can call on this person, call on this name, to kind of evoke this feeling. So yeah. So I'm just saying, great
I
question.
only
think it's
named
Black
it that
kids,
way
too.
because I wanted to speak about like my
Your
own
experience.
embodied
Yeah.
process, and I don't want to speak for others. And it's just, I'm curious. There's a lot of people who don't have their ancestry, and I'd
Yeah.
love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
Last question. And it's a great complex question.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We have another.
Yeah, it's a very complex question.
It is. You can say not today.
Yeah, and I was already seeing Simba. He was giving me some signals that
Oh, I
we need to go
apologize.
eat meat, nourish our bodies. Simba, where are you? Yeah.
Yes.
I see your question in two parts. One, the first part of your question speaks into the role and the nature of critical race theory, as they call it in the scholarship, where you are contemplating on the difficulties and the accident of history and the role that your ancestry has played in the history, which is defined by oppression, injustice, and violence. That's one part. And the other part relates into genealogy and knowing yourself and where you come from, and responding to my earlier proposition on the importance of knowing yourself. The first part, I think, you forgive me for constantly referencing Madiba, but he's one of my heroes. Madiba argues that to be free is not merely to cast one's chains, but to be free is to live in the manner in which, or is to live in a way of respecting the dignity and the freedom of others. So the process to recognize your role in enhancing their freedom, in enabling them to reach that level of, well, put it generally, humanizing others. They call it humanizing pedagogy. Also, those who think that the academics, they call it humanizing pedagogy. Here it's critical because you understand that the history that we come from is one that is defined by oppression, violence, and discrimination, and the role of your ancestry in that. And therefore yours is to constantly engage in a process of then humanizing the next person, recognizing the injustices of the past. Always engage in a process of educating even your peers, your neighbors, your friends who still hang up into what our generation say the colonization hangover, who still believe that they are more important than the next person. You know, in South Africa, they say they have some apartheid hangover. You know, they can't get, you know, away with their self-imposed and self-declared superiority, white superiority, if you call it. So how do you challenge that? How do you respond to that? You have to live in a manner that enhances and respects the freedom of others and the dignity of others, humanizing the next person. And here you also move on by understanding the position, your position in society in general. The reality is, if you're born white, you're born in privilege, and you have to contemplate with how do you manage that privilege. Recognizing and understanding that when me and you put side by side, you have an added advantage than I do. That is the nature of how the society is governed. And the process by which we challenge that is recognizing that privilege exists, and what then is your role in that. Let me give you an example. I know personally, I recognize I'm born with privilege. What is my privilege? My privilege is the fact that Madiba engaged in a relentless struggle against the apartheid regime and said, therefore, the status that he has in society is one of privilege that came as a result of sacrifice. So my privilege then dictates that in spaces where there are people who are marginalized, people who do not have voices, I have a responsibility to stand up and stand firm and speak against that injustice, because I speak from a position of privilege. There are spaces where I can speak without any consequences. Someone will say, they come from the Mandelas, they are like that, they are problematic. But the reality is the message will be sent. Someone who looks like me might not be able to say the things that I am able to say because I have the privilege to say them. Sometimes without consequences, sometimes with consequences. I'll give an example. With my previous employer, the core of our business was to fight for human rights. And when the struggle between the Palestinians and the Jews ensued, now the lines became blurred on who should talk and who should not talk. And then as an organization, we started, changing the manner in which we engage. We're no longer free to say there's a genocide. Do you remember that era where it was difficult to say genocide is taking place? I was here in Canada at some point. Not a single school could speak about what the Palestinian people were going through. I stood up with my organization and I spoke out and I said, what we are doing is in fact the betrayal of what we say we stand for. We stand for human rights. This is the time for us to speak. The consequences of which was for me to be fired. Granted, it's a small price to pay. I got fired from my organization. But I never stopped speaking out and speaking up. And I got invited into spaces during Building Bridges tour, where we went to schools and universities where you cannot talk about that. But because I had the privilege, I was allowed to talk about it. And they say, these ones, they come from a revolutionary background. It's part of who they are. They just cause chaos and they challenge the status quo. So that is how privilege works. So as a white person, you then have a privilege sometimes where you are required to stand up for the marginalized without even bearing any consequences for doing so. But if Simba does the same thing, the consequences are Simba will be fired, like I was fired for my last job. So that's the privilege you recognize. Then that is how you affirm when we talk about the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because you are. You affirm your humanity by affirming the humanity of others. This is exactly what we mean, the philosophy of Ubuntu. It begins by understanding that if Simba is marginalized and Simba is not in a position to speak up and speak against that marginalization, because of your privilege, you have an opportunity to speak up on behalf of Simba. And you likelihood of you not bearing the consequences that Simba would bear by being expelled at the university, for instance, are very high. So this is where you deal with that complexity. And the other part of figuring who you are and the difficulties that these generations and other generations face because they were not granted an opportunity to know who their ancestry begins and who they are and where they come from. That's a very complex.
Well, in our backgrounds, it's like 2,000 years of
Yes.
possible exploration. So
Yeah.
Ubuntu that you talk about is very similar to Irish and Scottish concepts of kith and kin. So instead of taking over other concepts from other cultures, I spent many years searching into what are the roots of my people and worked from that. So I really appreciate everything you said.
There is truly wisdom to be found in standing for others. There is some form of freedom that you get by just standing for others. And you talk about the Irish, for instance. The Irish are the only, if you're of Irish background, I can tell you for free that the Irish are the only people in the whole of Europe who stood against the marginalization of the mass black majority Africans in South Africa, who stood against apartheid. They're the only nation in Europe that stood up against apartheid, and that is their heritage.
The Fighting Irish.
And that is their history. So if you ask then, well, you say the Irish don't have any much value or history. Well, you don't know how revolutionary those people were.
Oh,
For us, we
I just mean it can be hard to find.
So sometimes it comes across hard to find because it's knowledge that is not passed from one generation to the other. But as a recipient of the Irish kindness, I know what their contribution is in my own history and the history of my own people. And when I look at them, I say they are the revolutionaries of Europe because of what they have done. And then if you're an Irish, then you can't say your name is not inscribed among the heroes and heroines of our generation. You know. Then you look at it and say, if someone says, then what then is your history? What is your lineage? I come from the history of revolutionaries. Those that defeated apartheid, those that defeated segregation. Those who are still engaged in a fight against marginalization, from the Brits, who still deprived them of their own land. So, in my view, each and every group, be it the Africans who were enslaved and brought into the US or Europe or in Canada, each of them have a history. They might not be able to pinpoint with clarity where their genealogy begins, but they can tell you that they fought relentlessly against colonialism in Africa whilst they were here, whilst they grew up here. The greatest of the revolutionaries. Where do you think us who in Africa were fighting against marginalization, we got our inspiration? We got it from our brothers and sisters here in North America who had survived segregation, who had survived slavery, who have survived discrimination, and we draw our strength from their fight and from their resilience. The strategies and tactics that were deployed by Mandela, they drew from the civil rights movement. And how the indigenous people living here in Canada relentlessly revolted against the oppressive system imposed by the Indian Act 1828, I think, when the Indian Act came into existence. That wisdom, that strength, and that resilience is what informed the basis of the strategies and tactics that we would later wage against oppression in other parts of the world. And that is your history. Yes, you must engage in it, in the process of discovering where you come from. And I have always said, when I introduce myself in the manner in which I do introduce myself, I always feel pity and pain when I think that my brothers and sisters in this part of the world, they were deprived of that privilege, deprived of that heritage and opportunity to be able to know who they are and where they come from. But they think that they are lost. They're really not lost, because us on the other side of the Atlantic, we drew our strength, our courage from their resilience. We learned from them. You know, it is them who showed us how we can wage relentlessly a fight against colonialism. So we see ourselves through their eyes, and we drew our strength from them. So when they themselves think that they're lost, they're not clear about where they come from, we know where they come from. They are part of who we are. You know, Simba came to South Africa, for instance. He spent almost a month in South Africa.
This is Simba.
Oh, this is Simba.
This is Simba, yeah. Simba.
And Simba immediately, because he knows who he is and where he comes from, his spirit connected with ease when he arrived in the motherland. Before he knew it, he was slaughtering cows without people as we were celebrating. There are pictures of him.
May surprise us.
I remember the time he even refused to shower for almost 4 days, and I asked him, what is your problem? He says, no, I need to connect with my people. And said, yes, do connect with your people, but our people do take a bath. So at the time we were doing a ceremony where we're remotely away from our comfort zone, so there were no showers, there was nothing. So I would wake up in the morning and I go to the river to take a bath, and they say, Simba, join me, let's go take a bath. He says, man, no. Me, I want to connect with people, I'm not taking. I say, Simba, your people used to go to the river like I am doing, let's go take a bath. You know? So, but when you visit where you come from, you feel that connection. You know, it happens organically. You feel it. Simba felt it. You know, before you know it, if you ask anyone in South Africa who have came across Simba, they don't even know his name. When he arrived, they gave him a new name. They said, from henceforth your name is Simba. Forget about Jaden. Right. They don't even know who Jaden is, but they know who Simba is. You know? So when you go there, your people would embrace you. Your people will give you your name, the name that resembles you. You know? And they will say Simba because he roars like a lion. Simba means the lion. So you can always connect. If you go home, if you come to the continent, the motherland, you will always feel the connection. I feel the connection when I'm here among my brothers and sisters. I don't have to be in the African continent to feel that connection. I feel it right here. It exists right here. Even in this room. That family, that brotherhood, that sisterhood exists even in this space. You know, you don't need to know exactly your geography, where you come from. Yes, I have the privilege to know, because it's something that was passed from one generation to the next. But when Simba went there, he connected instantly with the people. I remember a time, at some point Simba would disappear only to find out that he's sitting in the kitchen with the women who are cooking there. He's the one who's dishing for himself. Because that connection came with ease, it came organically. That everyone would ask, Simba, have you eaten? Simba had to eat 3 to 4 plates before they can be satisfied that he's really, truly he has eaten. So that's the love and the connection that comes more organically when you go back home. You see, even me now, I'm at home, I am looking forward to Simba feeding me. Now I'm going to go back and eat some serious meat with Simba. So it's that connection that happens organically. So again, I apologize. That question is very complex in nature. You know, I attempted to
told that once or twice in my life.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you taking the time and both your scholarly approach and also just the beautiful storyteller that you are. Things come through you, and I feel really lucky to have been here today. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madiba. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you coming here and blessing us. Pete, thank you for blessing us.
Appreciate it, brother. Appreciate it.
Michelle, thank
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for hosting us.
you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We appreciate your time and energy and effort. Was that?
Just press it a few times.
Y'all want to take a couple photos? Come on up. Feel free. Please, please. Anybody want to take some photos? Anyone? Come on up.
Thank you for watching another episode of Shop Talk. Please remember to press that subscribe button down at the bottom. Please.
I did it.